Sidetrack episode 65, Job Complaint. Thank you for listening to The History of the Papacy, an Agora podcast network member. We are, of course, on social media, Facebook and Twitter, and we also have a Facebook group called A2Z History Page Group. You can find the links to all of these things in the show notes and on the website a2zhistorypage.com. You can also just send me an email to the email address steve@a2zhistorypage.com. And we have a whole bunch of people to add to the History of the Papacy list of diptychs on patreon.com/papacy. At the Constantinople level, we have Brian, Stephen, and Rick. At the Alexandria level, we have Fiatjoff and Elizabeth. I really want to thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. It's so helpful to have your support, and it just makes things a lot easier, and it really helps to defray some of the costs that are associated with the show. And if you're interested in having your name immortalized on the History of the Papacy diptychs, there are many levels of support and many rewards, such as access to bonus content and receiving episodes early and completely ad-free on the bonus feed. All of your support, though, be it just simply listening to the show, that's a huge support. Apple Podcast reviews and really emails sent to me, they all really are very much appreciated, and I thank you. This is a very special episode featuring two longtime friends of the show and oftentimes collaborators, Ben Jacobs of the Wittenberg to Westphalia Wars of the Reformation podcast and Garry Stevens of the History in the Bible podcast. We reprise the so-called courtroom drama theme of the Samson episode to discuss the Old Testament book of Job. This episode turned out a little less tongue-in-cheek than the Samson episode, as the book of Job is really heavy, but the episode is still fun and informative, at least I think it is. Now, I really think you're going to enjoy this in-depth discussion of the book of Job, one of the most challenging books in the Bible. I'd also like to mention that the Agora Podcaster of the Month is not exactly a podcast, but it is the Agoraphobia Halloween special that's put out by the Agora Podcast Network every Halloween season. This is Agoraphobia III, believe it or not. Many of your favorite podcasters have submitted pieces to this great anthology, and I think you'll really enjoy Agoraphobia, so I definitely highly suggest you go to agorapodcastnetwork.com to learn more. A huge shout out goes to our Rome level patron, Peter the Great. I want to thank our Constantinople level patrons, Sandy, Andy, Paul, Dr. Jeff, Robert, Sean, Yoren, Molly, Mary Carmen, Doppo, Brian, Stephen, and Rick, as well as our Alexandria level patrons Francine, Richard, Justin, Rupert, Roberto, Fiatjoff, and Elizabeth. I really sincerely appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I look forward, as always, to seeing you on our next step on our trip through the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church.
All rise for the First Judicial District High Court of High Historical High Crimes and Misdemeanors. Judge Ben presiding. Once again, we do not have a bailiff due to budget cuts. Thank you all for standing, and you may now sit. We are here to hear a case against Hasatan, who is accused of multiple counts of prosecutorial misconduct, including the following complaints. Hasatan misused his prosecutorial powers granted to him by the Almighty in regards to Job. Whereas God wanted to test Job, the plaintiff, a little bit, Hasatan far exceeded those bounds. He seemed to take glee in it. Hasatan caused great pain and suffering to Job and his heirs. Namely, he killed Job's heirs. Presumably that caused them to suffer, and materially harmed Job by destroying all of his lands, including his livestock and thus livelihood, and that would be suffering-inducing, I suppose. Hasatan caused bodily harm to Job by inflicting him with running sores and boils. Okay? Hasatan ruined Job's hard-earned good name with the community, including such notable figures as Bildad the Shuhite, Eliphaz the Temalite, Zophar the Namathite, and Elihu the descendant of Buz. Those are all remarkably honorific names that are well known to all, of course. Hasatan attempted to test a righteous man outside of the acceptable limits of biblical testing. Damages asked for: compensatory 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 oxen, 500 donkeys. Punitive: at least 1,000,000 pieces of silver for the loss of all his children, servants, and the terrible affliction of boils. A few million more for the loss of Job's position in the community. The defendant has won the coin toss, and so Hasatan will make the opening statement.
And I shall make the ultimate opening statement. I shall quote from the Almighty himself. The Book of Job, which the defendant apparently wrote, chapter 2, verse 6. So the Lord said to me, see, he is in your power. Only spare his life. Mr. Prosecutor, MacLeod, I was only following orders. And orders from the highest possible authority. Job, of course, was a great sinner, although he denies it constantly. And the Lord sent me to test him, which I did very effectively. Job, in fact, improved his rhetorical skills so enormously that he wrote a 30-chapter book about it, in which he endlessly complains about what's happened to him. But, of course, my employer, in the end, convincingly argues to him that he deserved everything he got, and, well, hey, he's the boss. And I'd like to point out, actually, that at no time in the book does Job, the defendant, dispute my employer's power and knowledge. Job just complains a lot. And, frankly, at the end of the book, Job ends up a lot better than when he started. A lot better. He needs no compensation, and he certainly does not deserve any sort of punitive damages. He's way better off. Admittedly, his former children and servants are all dead, but that's just collateral damage to make a moral point of some sort.
I mean, he got new ones, right?
Oh, yeah, you got new ones. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
So shut up, Job. That's my defense. Admittedly, a little unsophisticated.
All right, we've heard the opening statement from the defense. Would the plaintiff like to make an opening statement?
I certainly would. I make a very simple argument here in that this isn't about God. God wanted Job to get a little testing to see how far he could push him, but within normal bounds. Hasatan is trying to blame his employer, but Hasatan is actually the one who is perpetrated all of these various harms against my employer, Job. Job's hard-earned good name the judge named these various magnates of the community, Bildad and Eliphaz, and I don't even know these other guys, Zophar, but they're great
Presumably
guys.
Wonderful, honorable people.
Great guys, pillars of the community who have turned against my client for no reason. Now, Hasatan does make a point that God made Job right in the end in an out-of-court settlement, but that does not excuse what Hasatan does, nor does it alleviate his culpability, and therefore he should have to pay a lot, a real lot.
I would also suggest to the plaintiff that it was Hasatan's idea in the first place to test Job.
Yes, that is correct, Judge. It was in the very first instance Hasatan. In every aspect, Hasatan is the one who incurred all these harms onto Job, and in the end, he is the one who's ultimately responsible.
I'd like to thank the court for making that suggestion.
But of course, as we enter into the cross-examination phase of this discussion, surely Hasatan didn't get that idea from nowhere. Would you like to comment on where you got the idea to test Job?
Well, in Job's own book, he is notably silent on the matter. But I'm not called Hasatan the adversary for nothing, although a better title would be God's best buddy and friend. That's it, friend, yes. That's just what we do.
I think...
it's just what I do.
Why... but presumably you were made in order to be this way.
Ah, yes, very good point, my lad. My boss did indeed create me to be his right-hand man, to test humans across the world. Again, I'm just following orders.
Now, where does this book of Job fit into the larger scheme of the Old Testament?
The book of Job, it depends if you're reading a Hebrew Bible or a Christian Bible. And fortunately I have one in front of me. In the Hebrew texts, it's put into the third and last part of the Tanakh, which is the writings. And in the writings, the order goes Psalms, Proverbs, Job. So it was, by that fact alone, written quite late. In Christian texts, it's placed as the junction between the history books and the poetic books. And in Christian texts, it stands after Esther and before Psalms. So it's in roughly the same position in both versions, but the Christians make the point that sort of Job, well, it seems like it's a history book, but it's also pretty philosophical, so we'll put it right at the point after the history books and before the philosophical ones. We think that it was written quite late in the Persian period. The earliest possible time is really the Babylonian period. So the Jews are now either in Babylon or they're under the Persian Empire. The language itself, I don't speak Hebrew myself, but I'm told that it is notoriously difficult and that scholars can basically read a passage and take away two diametrically opposite interpretations. It's thought that language is not actually archaic, but archaizing, in that someone has faked it and they're pretending to write as though they're writing in a much earlier type of Hebrew. And maybe that's part of the difficulty of the book, because basically the guy who wrote it, it'll be like someone pretending to write in Shakespearean English today, but they don't actually know that much about Shakespearean English. So it just comes across as a complete mess stylistically. And also apparently the book is full of words which are unique in the Hebrew Bible. It's got words which come from Aramaic and Arabic. So maybe the guy is fairly cosmopolitan, the author of it. The book does resemble a lot of Babylonian literature, where you have people engaged in a sort of a dialogue about what justice is and how things are going on. So it was probably heavily influenced by that sort of thing. And it does seem to stand in a pretty long Middle Eastern tradition of what you call wisdom literature, I suppose, where you're basically just tossing around ideas and you're trying to come to terms with the fact that the world is horrible. You'll probably die before you're 35. You'll lose 7 kids in the process. So how can we justify all this?
So markedly different from Egyptian wisdom literature. I don't know if you've heard any of it, but just from listening to the History of Egypt podcast, their wisdom literature is like, how do we deal with everything being so good? Sometimes things are bad, but mostly we just have so much good stuff. We should just be nice to everybody. If I had to pick one ancient empire to live in, I think.
That sounds reasonable. Yeah, okay. I suppose Egypt did have the advantage of not being invaded every generation.
Yes, that's fair. Plenty of food.
And plenty of food, nice big river. Yum, yum.
What do they know about these places? Job is from Uz or Uz, and then the Shushites and the Tammanites and the Naphalites and the descendants of Buzz. Like, what do they explain what all that is about? Why they're so specific with geography?
Yeah, I'm just taking a look at my study Bible here. It says, Eliphaz and Zophar bear names associated with the Transjordanian peoples called the Kedemites. Right. Kedem was a traditional source of wisdom. The Temanites. Teman was a grandson of Esau, ancestor of the Edomites. The Shuites. Shua was a son of Abraham, by his servant Keturah, and probably stands for the Edomites. So the names seem to resemble some of the Israelites' petty neighbors from the sound of it.
I had always, from Hebrew school and everything, I had always assumed that Job was sort of outside Israel proper. And,
yes, there's, it says he's from Uz or Uz, however you pronounce it. It doesn't say that he's an Israelite at all. In fact, it says he's not an Israelite. But everyone here does seem to be vaguely Yahwistic. Yeah. There's
part of that broader Semitic cultural area that bled into the Fertile Crescent area. Yeah.
The only thing which would indicate a bit of polytheism is if you take a look at chapter 1, verse 6. It introduces, one day the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord, and the adversary came along with them. So, and again in chapter 2 it says, one day the divine beings. Now, apparently in the Hebrew that actually does mean it is a direct translation of the sons of Elohim. So that indicates, it's impossible to say, I suppose. Is that indicating a polytheistic context, or is it in fact written by someone before Judaism became entirely monotheistic? You can make an argument either way, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or it could just be referring to angels and that sort of thing.
You'd think they would have gotten that language locked down if it was
by the Babylonian exile.
Yeah.
But no, the Torah and stuff is just full of stuff like that. And something I noticed that back in my Hebrew school days, and I'd go in the book of Exodus, what's this about him fighting with the Egyptian gods? And my teacher was just like, shh, look over there, dangling keys. You put it in a textbook. You didn't need to even put this part in there. Shh. Okay.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of remnants like that throughout the Bible, aren't there?
Yeah.
And in God's speeches at the end, when he's justifying himself and basically saying, I'm God, and he talks about the ancient sea monsters.
The
sea monsters. Yeah, the sea monsters were apparently very widely held myths amongst the Canaanites and people of the Mediterranean littoral,
right?
Who didn't actually do that much sailing. And they seem to be a common Mesopotamian theme too.
Yeah.
So you got Leviathan and Rahav and all these things, and they must have been alive and well in the memories of the people at this time.
Well, old legends like that never go away. People, we're still telling stories about Hercules. We're retelling stories.
That's true.
Disney came up with an entire new mythos for Hercules. It's like no one even believes in the old gods anymore, but we came up with this new story where Hades has blue hair for some reason.
And I think that's one of the most strange parts of the book is when he mentions Leviathan, and the way I read it is that he's like, look I got too much going on here. There's sea monsters, for crying out loud. What am I bothering talking to you for? It's kind of like the professor at college where you ask a question and he asks like he's too busy, but then he keeps talking when you have to leave. It's...
I took that a different way though. It was like, let's relate this to the professor. You ask the question and the professor's just like, look, I wrote 19 books on this subject and you're asking me this silly question. You're questioning my grade on your paper. Come on. Which of us is really the guy here? I'm God. I beat the sea monster. And you're worried about your fig tree. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, here, have 90 more fig trees. Don't bother me.
That whole end, too, that Hasatan never has to come back and answer for anything. God comes and steps up, which I would think, like, at this point, the way the whole book's gone, why isn't he thrown Hasatan under the bus?
Right. Well, so, there's an open question. Well, does Hasatan want to answer that one?
Well, I suppose that the Almighty decided to take responsibility for his decisions. And he knew that I, a humble hireling, was in no position to respond. But yes, I disappear from the book pretty early, don't I? I'm there for the first 2 chapters, and that's it. I'm out of there. I've done my work, Lord. All yours now. Thank you. Toodles.
One of the big debates in medieval Christian angelology was, do angels have free will? Right? Is it possible for angels, and let's call Hasatan at this point one of the angels, do angels have the ability to even think of anything beyond what God wants them to think about? And so there's a certain party, and these conversations continue. It's just not as important as it was in the Middle Ages. But so there's still this line of thought that angels are completely incapable of doing anything that God doesn't want them to do. But then on the flip side, there's clearly they have free will because there was the fall. Hasatan's near future, I suppose.
Well, I'm not. Where we are talking about extra biblical literature here from the first book of Enoch in the Bible. If you don't mind, there's no fall here. Oh, it's humans that have fallen. Oh.
Sure. But so there's that's an interesting angle to this. Is, are angels even capable of doing anything that God doesn't want them to do? In which case, that would sort of put any guilt out of Hasatan's hands. But on the other hand, that doesn't seem to be totally consistent with the full extent of biblical literature either. But at a certain level, that doesn't matter, because even if there's free will, we have an omnipotent God who theoretically created all of us and has an understanding of what we're going to do, even if we have free will. So, depending on who you ask within the Christian tradition, we have free will, which is just serious enough to make us guilty and worthy of going to hell, even though God preordains who is going to get saved and who is not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the whole thing with Job. It completely gets into the problem of evil without giving us a real solution.
Well, then it's saying that it didn't matter that Job was righteous. I mean, that's when you start digging down to the baser point, it is preordained. God can just, okay, Job, you were righteous, but really who cares? Even though in other parts of the Old Testament, even it says basically diametrically the opposite, that if you're righteous, you get good stuff. And then this one's saying, well, if you're righteous, you can get screwed over.
Yeah, but if you do, because God says that that's what was supposed to happen, that's clearly what was supposed to happen, and we don't need to agree or disagree.
Hasatan, what do you say? You said that there was a lot of rabbinical writing about this. What are the rabbis saying?
The rabbis were just as confused as we are today. Yeah, we are in good company. They couldn't make, well, like me, I suppose. They had a lot of difficulty working out what the book was about. But they tended to frame their discussions about when was the book written. So there's a whole section in one document which was written in the very late Roman Empire, which is a discussion of Genesis. But along the way, they get sidetracked, as usual, for rabbis, and they end up asking, well, when did Job live? Some say the days of Abraham, some in the days of Jacob, some in the time of the judges. But one really sort of out of left field suggestion, which tackles the question of when did Job live and also explains the book, comes from one Rabbi Joseph ben Halafta, or however you say that. And he says, Job was born when they went down into Egypt and died when they went up out of Egypt. You'll find that in essence his lifespan was 210 years, while Israel spent 210 years in Egypt.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
I thought they were in Egypt for 400 years. That's what I
Well,
thought.
if you add his life to the time that they were down there, then it's 400 years.
Yeah, I suppose so. Anyway, the rabbi continues. Now, when Satan came to denounce Israel, God incited him against Job instead. And the rabbi then another rabbi continues. It may be compared to a shepherd who stood watching his flocks when a wolf came to attack him, whereupon he ordered, throw him a he-goat on which to vent his rage. And someone else says, it may be compared to a king sitting at his meal when a dog came and attacked him, whereupon he ordered, give him a bone to worry. Thus it is written, God delivereth me to the ungodly, and casteth me into the hands of the wicked. Basically, the rabbis are saying, in order to distract Satan from the Hebrew flight from Egypt, God sicked Satan onto Job.
It does beg the question, though. If you have an omnipotent God, why does he need to do that?
Well, yeah.
Rather than just tell Satan, cool it. It's like if the shepherd had a high-powered rifle and was just like, give him a goat. I don't want that goat anyway.
Yeah, why does he have to... I mean, that almost makes it worse. Why does he have to throw Job under the bus to save other people? And is it assumed that Job is some sort of Israelite? Or like you said, is he just a vague Yahwehist?
The implication, I think, of that passage from the rabbis would imply that he's not an Israelite. He's someone in Uz. So basically God says to Satan, oh, look, over there, Job. Then he points in the opposite direction and tells Moses, come on, now's your chance,
So really, who cares about Job? I mean, that's not a good...
Yeah. It's not a great look.
No, it's not a great look.
But it does. Maybe this does mark the transition point in terms of how we're treating Hasatan from a angelological point of view, from being God's lackey, right-hand man, prosecuting attorney, to being, Satan. Maybe that's part of this whole shift.
Yes, it could be, because Satan's treated quite well in the Bible.
He's just a guy.
He's just fine. Yeah, he's just a guy. He's just a bureaucrat. It's only after the Old Testament closes and before the New Testament opens that he gets this really bad reputation. Right. Wholly undeserved.
What is the thought of how his Hasatan's reputation goes so far south when it's pretty neutral to being, the ultimate bad guy? Where does that come from? Is that something that's like filtered through Enoch?
Yeah, in fact, it seems to originate with the first book of Enoch and with the book of Jubilees, as far as I know. But where the first book of Enoch gets its ideas from, God knows. Yeah. They just seem to spring fully formed into existence.
It's just this whole boiling soup of different philosophical and mystical ideas that was going on in the Middle East at that time. You already had Zoroastrianism, and then just the Gnostic ideas and dualist ideas that sort of followed through from that. There's probably no way to draw a direct line. Any sources we would have had have been lost, but basically everything was going on in that area.
I think you could argue that Satan was created after the failure of the book of Job to explain why bad things happen to good people.
That makes sense.
Yeah, they need somebody.
Yeah, that would seem to make sense.
You have to have some personification of that, especially when you have the Persians living next door who do have a personification of that.
Right. Well, you sort of don't need it. Rabbinic Judaism to this day has no personification of evil. Like, we have stuck with the, Hasatan biblical bureaucrat vision of the angelology. But yeah, I mean, it certainly in that context, it certainly would have been a much more attractive idea, I think.
Or yeah, maybe instead of saying you have to, it's easier to have.
Yeah.
It's a logical. It's an easy logical jump.
Or if you're building up a new religion out of snippets of other old religions, certainly an attractive idea to go with.
Yeah, I mean, Satan gives Christianity a fairly easy out to explain why an omnipotent good God permits evil to happen. How does rabbinic Judaism explain that today, or it doesn't even tackle a problem, or it doesn't see a problem?
It sticks with the stuff from the Old Testament, but I'm not as big a biblical scholar as I would want to be honest, because I love the dialectic of the Talmud and everything, and I've never gotten to dig into it really. But what I was raised in, the way we generally treat it is you're being tested. No one knows what God's doing. That's the length and breadth of the explanation. You did something wrong, or you're being tested, or I don't know. Who knows? Let's just tell a joke about it and move on.
That's pretty much the attitude of the Book of Job, isn't it? You are being tested. We don't know why. There doesn't seem to be any reason for it.
And ultimately, it's not your place to ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more or less the rabbinic take, as I understand it. And as unsatisfying as it is, it's also, if that's your universal worldview, it does get back to whatever the answer is. You still have to deal with it, and you might as well just move on with your life.
Okay, that's reasonable.
I think Job fits in a good place too, where good things or bad things do happen to good people. You might as well put it out there. And I think that's where Job does a good job. Whereas you can't just keep saying in all the rest of the books, oh, if you do the X, Y, and Z and you're good, then all good things happen. Right. Well, you need some sort of way to explain the opposite.
Right. And the issue with the Christian version, not that it's my place to say anything about this, but, to me, the issue with the Christian version is that there's an infinite regress. Okay, so you've created Satan as the personification of all the bad things that happen. Well, why did God create Satan? You just push it back one level, and ultimately you get back to the problem of evil no matter what you do. When you have a omnipotent, benevolent God, you still end up with the same question. So it's always going to be a problem. And you can get into some really high-level metaphysical answers for it, but and most religions have. At the end of the day, you still have to just live your life.
Yeah, I think Christianity always has had the issue of they have to make it really explicit that Satan is not the counterbalance to God, and that it's not dualistic, and they've had to do a lot of explaining on that. Yeah.
Satan's definitely weaker, but he's there to test you or whatever, however you want to explain it, which just gets back to the Book of Job.
Yes.
So maybe that weakness of the Book of Job is actually a strength. It's that no one really has an answer to the problem of evil that, is really satisfying to everybody. So we're just going to end.
Yeah. And I suppose the Book of Job says, well, at least I tried. I tried to explain it. At least I put in an effort. Okay. I admit
It could have always come down to the fact that they needed something in there, and they're like, "Oh man, this book doesn't quite do it. This one doesn't. Oh well, Job, that's as good as it gets. Let's use that one."
At least there's some comedy in there.
Yeah.
Monsters. I mean, what else do you need?
All right. I believe, gentlemen, that I have enough to make my decision. So I'm going to go deliberate, and I will return shortly.
Garry, have you ever been in a situation where you need to cover yourself in ashes and wail because you've been put in such a terrible situation?
Why, yes, almost every day at work.
Well, I have the product just for you, Ashkelon brand ashes.
Ooh.
They're made of the highest quality hardwood ashes. And when you're in a pinch and you need to cover yourself in ashes, you can use Ashkelon brand ashes.
Oh, wow. They sound great. Do they come in different colors?
They come in different colors. In this day and age, they come in different scents.
Ooh.
Artificial scents. You like mango strawberry? Is that popular in Australia?
Yeah. Yeah, we have lots of mangoes here. Now, will these ashes irritate my sensitive skin?
Well, it's interesting you ask that, Garry. They're made from only the highest quality hardwood ashes made from certified organic trees from the land of ooze.
Oh, wow.
Which your boils shouldn't ooze, but...
Right. Now, where can I get these ashes?
Well, you can get them everywhere where fine ashes are sold.
Oh, I hope Amazon has a special on them soon.
Oh, and Amazon Prime Day is soon, and you should be able to get them there.
Oh, wow. I'll put in a big order now.
I hope that this shows up. Maybe if this shows up on some sort of Amazon searching everything on the internet, maybe they'll want to do a real advertisement.
Yeah. Ashes and what is sackcloth? Oh, it's this cloth you make sacks out of. Okay, right.
Like burlap or something. I mean, I mean, that is punishment enough if you're going to wear a burlap sack around.
Yeah, that's really rough. You wouldn't care about the ashes if you were covered in a sack like that. You'd be itching just from the sack.
So here's the thing, though, with the sackcloth. The thought had occurred to me, and so they were wearing sackcloth, but the burlap is made out of jute, which is a tropical product. Yeah, so maybe there was something else they used to use or something. Like they just used low-quality wool or something. The earliest known appearance is in the late 17th century. I wonder what they used before that. I mean, they clearly used something.
Yeah, I can't imagine what they would use. And then hair shirts is another issue. I mean, you'd have to go out of your way to make it out of an uncomfortable animal's hair. Like if it's wool, everybody wore wool.
I think that was the point. They would actually go out of their way to come up with something that was...
I can't think of an animal that...
No, I mean, goat's hair is used, isn't it?
Has particularly uncomfortable hair.
Yeah. Well, I happen to know an awful lot about different sheep fibers because my wife knits. They're not all made the same. The longer hairs are more scratchy and uncomfortable. So maybe it was, and that'd be more something you'd call hair because it looks like a hair. So maybe it was like something along those lines that they used, and you comb them to separate out the different hairs. So maybe it was, maybe we're talking about the same thing. Like maybe they combed out those long hairs and used them for making just transportation materials and sacks and stuff. And then someone would make shirts out of them for the monks.
We've saved the worst for you.
Gentlemen, this is a difficult case. Satan seems to initiate the events of the book of Job, but as an angel, he can't do anything God doesn't want him to do. This initiates the universal problem of evil. On the one hand, angels like Hasatan can't do anything God doesn't want them to do, but on the other hand, we do see in some biblical literature that angels do show some ability to move against God. So that gets us to the basic problem of, does God know when we are going to do bad things, and is he capable of stopping them? One argument against this is that God does know when we're going to do bad things, but it's all for the greater good. One argument is that evil is just the absence of good, or possibly things are evil just because things are good just because God says they're evil. Ultimately, many arguments around free will reduce down to the idea that we have free will, or the perception of free will, just so that God can see whether or not we would choose to do good or bad, and then that gives him the ability to punish us. So, by this extended philosophical musing on late Protestant predestination theory, I will decide that Hasatan is guilty, and so is Job. And so no award will be made, and God is fine.
Very wise. Very wise, my lad. Very wise.
Or should I say that both parties will make a payment of goats to the Lord? Should I say that instead?
Well, we'll take the hair off first and make a nice mohair jacket.
Given this extended musing on Protestant predestination theory, I find that Hasatan is guilty, but so is Job. Both sides of this case will make a sacrifice of 500 goats to the Lord and skin them and use the hair from the skin to make uncomfortable hair shirts that they will wear around while wailing and covering themselves with ashes. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure to hear this case. Thank you all for listening to this lighthearted attempt at doing our trial of Hasatan in the context of the Book of Job. I am Benjamin Jacobs, once again reprising my role as Judge Ben. My main podcast show is Wittenberg to Westphalia, The Wars of the Reformation. With me today has been Steve as the plaintiff, and then we have Garry Stevens as Hasatan. So, Steve, would you like to start us off by telling us your show?
I am the host of the History of the Papacy podcast, which you can find on iTunes and all those great places. I also have another podcast, Beyond the Big Screen, which looks at the background and context of movies.
And Mr. Hasatan, Garry Stevens.
Hi there, I'm Garry Stevens from the History in the Bible podcast, and once again I was Hasatan, an unjustly maligned character.